Hello, I'm Dustin McFarland. I think a lot of people have this same worry, and if you don't, maybe you should. But if you're married, it's, do you worry about your spouse? Really, if you were to die first, that's really the question. Do you worry how your spouse would live if you were to pass away first? And, that's something that not only should be a worry, but then we should do something about it. Like for me, I make sure that my trust is up to date, that I have life insurance that will help, cover my wife's expenses if I were to die first. And we're relatively young. We're both about 50, almost 50. And so we don't really think about it that much. We haven't had friends pass away yet. We haven't had really a lot of family members pass away yet. All of our parents are still alive. I actually have a grandmother who's still alive. She's getting old, but she's still moving. And so as we get older, it becomes more and more real and part of life as people close to us pass away. But I'm concerned about my wife. I'm concerned how she would live. And let me share a story with you to kind of express what happens when you don't plan for your spouse. So I was meeting with this wonderful little old lady, and that's really what she was. She was a little old lady. She was in her mid-90s, and she had been married to her husband for 40 years. This was her second marriage. It was both of their second marriages. They both had children from previous marriages. So she was 90. She had been married for 40 years. She had got married in her early 50s, and they had both lived a long and healthy life, and her husband finally had passed away. But remember, I started talking about, do you worry about how your spouse would live if you were to die first? That should be a concern. Like, you should ask that question and then look at how things are set up and figure out the answer to that question. Figure out, how would your spouse live? So in this case, so I'm talking to this woman, and here's her story. She got married 40 years ago. She had, I think, 4 children or 5 children from a previous marriage. Her husband had a couple of children from a previous marriage, and they come together and they get married. At this point, when they got married, most of their children were essentially grown. And so they lived a comfortable life. But one of the things that they never commingled their money. That means they never really had a joint checking account. They never bought a piece of property together, never had a house that they owned together, never had anything really that was in both of their names. He had his house, which actually he owned before they got married 40 years ago. He had his house that they lived in. She had her house that early on in their marriage they sold, and she used the money for whatever she used the money for. Her, through their working years, her income went to her account and she spent it. His income went to his account and he spent it, and he paid his mortgage with his money. And then they never really questioned it. They never thought, oh, well, maybe this, what would happen if one of us died? How would the other live? And then on top of that, there was a disparity. The husband, he just had more. He had more money. He had more real estate. He had more income than his wife. And it didn't really matter as long as they were living together. He paid for everything. So he never asked that question. So, they got old. She was in her 90s and he was in his late 90s before he passed away. And before he passed away, he was always really close to one of his children. And so with one of his children, he ended up putting that daughter on as a co-owner on the house. And then when the house sold and all the money went into a bank account, his daughter was a co-owner on that account. And it was a joint account between the husband and the daughter, and the wife had no ownership in it. And again, she still benefited from it. She still was able, as long as he was alive, he had money, and they paid. When they sold the house, they moved into a place where they rented, and the rent was paid, and it was no problem. But she didn't own anything. She owned nothing other than, and over the years, her savings had been dwindled down, and she stopped working and was on retirement. But she really relied on her husband and his assets, and she never even asked, honey, if you die, where will I live, or what money will I have? And he never said, honey, we should talk about this. I'm 5 years older than you. I'm in my 80s or 90s. If I die, he had a pension plan. He never added a spousal support option. So he took the maximum amount, which means when he dies, the pension stopped, and he had bank accounts and real estate that was he co-owned with his daughter. He just put her name on it as a co-owner. And I know what people say, just in case anything happens. Well, let me tell you what happened. When he died, the daughter owned everything. She was the other owner. She just, poof, owned everything. And it all went to her. The money in the bank account went to her. The other pieces of real estate went to her. And so I'm sitting there in my conference room with this widow whose husband of 40 years just passed away. And she's saying, Dustin, I don't have the pension to live on. I have just a little bit of Social Security that I'll get, and I'll get a portion of my husband's, but that's it. It's all gone. What can I do? Can I get any of this money back for my daughter, for my stepdaughter? And they weren't on the best of terms. The mom, the woman in my office, and the stepdaughter, they weren't on the best of terms. And, the stepdaughter didn't coerce her dad. In fact, he loved his daughter. He willingly put her name on things. He willingly shared his money with her. He willingly opened bank accounts and owned real estate with her. There was no coercion. There was no taking advantage of a 90-year-old guy who was, losing it. That's what Dad wanted. But he never asked the question, if you die first, how will I live? What money will I have? What house will I live in? And not asking that question and finding a solution to that problem has serious consequences. You can't unring the bell. You can't go back in time and say, well, we should fix this now, after the fact, after somebody actually passes away. And so he passes away at 90 plus whatever years old, just shy of 100. And she's in her early 90s and she's sitting in my office saying, Dustin, I have nothing. I don't know where to live. I have no money. This daughter has all of his assets. And it's not like she stole them. He died and then they just became hers. The daughter has no legal obligation, no moral obligation, no ethical obligation to give anything to her stepmother. Fortunately, she has several children who are doing quite well, and so she can live with them. But after a life of being independent and being able to, living with her husband and enjoying life and doing the traveling and, buying gifts for kids and really just enjoying life to the fullest, in her final years, she'll be dependent on her children. She'll live with the kids and probably move around from kid to kid because, she doesn't want to be a burden on anyone. She won't be able to drive anymore. She won't really have discretionary income anymore. She doesn't have a house anymore. And so she becomes really dependent. And thankfully, by the grace of God, she has children, more than one. She has children who, several of them, have the means to support her, have homes big enough for her to live in where it's not cramped and crowded. She will never go without medicine or the essentials of life. But there's a little bit of pride or dignity that gets kind of swallowed up in this whole thing, where she was once, free from relying on her children to now completely dependent on her children. And this is because no one asked the question, what happens to my spouse if I die first? And especially that's if the income earning or asset levels are vastly different, right? I mean, if you're both broke and have nothing, it's not going to matter. But if one has an earning potential and the other doesn't, and if one has assets or resources from wherever, the inheritance or whatever, and the other doesn't, it's a real concern that we should ask. Honey, if I die first, how will you live? Mrs. Smith, you were that wasn't a real name, we're protecting the privacy, but I said, Mrs. Smith, you were kind of asleep at the wheel. Why didn't you ask the question? Why weren't you concerned about you? And she tried to say, well, I thought he would do what he was supposed to do. Here's the problem with that, folks. No one can read your mind, and your right and their right may have different definitions. His right, his obligation, the right thing for him was providing for his daughter. He thought that's the right thing. I got to make sure my daughter is taken care of. And to be fair to this gentleman who's deceased, I don't want to talk ill of the dead between a rock and a hard place. His daughter was depending on him to take care of her. And so he's in the middle. Do I give assets to my wife? Do I give assets to my daughter? Where's this stuff go? I want my wife and I to live long and old and lives together, and then both of us will just kind of pass away within 10 minutes of each other, and we won't have to worry about this. That's my plan. Bad plan. That's impossible, right? But I understand his point. I understand the problem that he had. How do you take care? Because the more he gives his wife and the more he gives his daughter, the less he gives his wife, and he's really stuck. 50 and less. Yes, he could have made arrangements like it goes to my wife, and then when she dies, then it goes to my daughter. He could have done a lot of things. But you know why he didn't? Because nobody asked the question, honey, if you die first, how will I live? And that is a legitimate question and it's a hard conversation. It means making your spouse choose between his or her children, and you might not want to know the answer. You might know it, and you might not want to hear it out loud. You might know the answer. You might be afraid that you're not going to be chosen, that your spouse is going to take care of their children before he or she takes care of you. But you should know what's worse than that are the surprises. What's worse than that are assuming that, quote, your spouse will do the right, will do the ethical thing, will do the moral thing, will do the God-fearing thing, and whatever that happens to be. And if you're a child, then obviously the right thing is take care of your child. And I hope I'm never in that kind of predicament where I'm choosing between the people that I love most in my life. But you have to ask the question. This stuff is real. And so a lot of times people will say, Dustin, I just need a simple trust, a simple will. My situation is so simple. But is it? And look at the consequences of not planning. They didn't die intestate. They planned. Oh, and then can I just add one more level of kind of madness to this whole thing? So the gentleman who passed away, he had a trust. Like, he planned. He went to the lawyer. He paid the fee. He did all the whatever and put together the trust, just like he was supposed to. But the problem is he took things out of the trust and put his daughter's name on it. And then his daughter had full access to the money. And in fact, while he was alive, he started giving her big piles of money, just giving it to her while he was alive so she could, invest in her whatever thing she wanted to do. He didn't need it. And nobody asked if his wife needed it. The wife didn't ask. The husband didn't ask. Surely the daughter doesn't care. And so he has this trust. And so the wife brings his trust into me. And she says, Dustin, I'm the trustee of my deceased husband's trust. His daughter has all the money. So what do I do? And a trust with no money is like an empty vessel. It's like an empty bucket. But there's nothing to distribute, nothing to do nothing with. It's nothing. It's empty. And it took a few minutes to really explain that concept. And she said, but I get half. And I said, yeah, great. You get half of nothing. And the math just doesn't work, right? 0 divided by 2. You get an error message on your phone. If you do put it in the calculator. Like, it doesn't even give you a number. It's an error message. Like, you can't do it. You can't. So there's no asset. So the money was gone. Nobody asked the question. Nobody was concerned. So this is not simple. You should not be looking for fast, easy, cheap, down and dirty, kind of give me your lowest price. Don't think about anything. Here's the problem that the attorney made. The attorney didn't ask the question, sir, Mr. Smith, if you pass away, how will your wife live? They never once in 40 years had that conversation. How is that possible? You're in your 60s and you don't think, oh, our friends are dying. Maybe we should get in our 70s, in our 80s, in our 90s. At some point you realize, man, we're 90 years old. Plus, we could pass away. Maybe we should talk about how's this going to go? But no one was looking. And you know who else wasn't looking out for the wife? None of her kids. No one came and said, hey, Mom, if your husband, our stepdad, if your husband passes away, how will you live? Where will the money come from? Or at least have this conversation. If your husband passes away, are you going to live with me or my sister or my brother? They didn't make any plans at all. And so now it's just surprise and regret and remorse and sadness and guilt and shame. There's nothing happy about this. There's nothing because they missed the opportunity. And it was like staring them right in the face for 10 or 20 or 30 years. And no one said a word. No one asked the question. No one did a thing to really take care of, make sure that this woman had a place to live. You've got to do more and ask, if my spouse dies, how will I live? Where will the money come from? Here's an interesting one. A lot of times people have life insurance. I hear a lot, well, man, I have plenty of life insurance. My wife will have plenty. So do you want to know? Here's the math you need for life insurance. And most life insurance agents don't even give you this formula. You need to write this down. This is how you know how much life insurance you need. This is important. If you don't have enough money in the bank, then you need life insurance. And life insurance would have been a great solution for this Mr. and Mrs. Smith that I was just talking about. This is how much life insurance you need. Okay, your annual income is $100,000 a year. So gross it up a little bit to 110 or 120, but let's just, for easy math, we'll just take 100, okay? $100,000 a year, and you need to replace that income. So if someone says, oh, I'll get my wife $1 million policy. If I die, she gets $1 million. Well, that means that's only 10 years of income at $100,000 a year that your wife is going to take out. In year 3, she takes 100, and at the end of 10, and maybe even 11, if it does well, and the money's gone. So if your wife is 95, $1 million is probably fine. But if you want your wife to be able to live on the life insurance for the rest of her life, here's how you do it. You assume a conservative rate of return of 4%. So 4% of $1 million is $40,000. $40,000. And I need my wife to make $100,000. So $1 million produces 40, $2 million produces 80, $3 million produces 120. Yeah, that gets us there. I need $3 million of life insurance so that if I die, that is sitting in an investment account producing 4% a year. My wife can pull out the 4%. Her lifestyle does not change at all. She lives in the same house, drives the same car, buys the same clothes, goes on the same vacations, travels to the same destinations, gives the kids the same amount of birthday presents. Everything stays the same. She's not a pauper. She's not poor. She's not worried about money. Her lifestyle is not impacted at all. And she can do that year after year after year because she's never pulling any money of the principal. She's only pulling that 4% of income every year. Year 2, she pulls 4% of 120. There's still $3 million in the bank. And year 3, she pulls 4% of 3 million, which is another 120. There's still 3 million in the bank, and so on. She can do that forever. And you know what else is cool? If she dies, your kids can keep doing it. So to replace $100,000 a year of income, you don't need a $500,000 a year policy. Oh, that'll take care of my wife for 5 years. What is that going to do? She's going to be broke in 5 years. I want you to ask the question, honey, if you die, how will I live? In my family, with my wife, I'm the breadwinner. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. It's my obligation to make sure that she is taken care of. That's the deal we had. We made the deal that she would take care of the house and do most of the child rearing, and I would produce the income, right? I would go to work. And yeah, we do have like a Ward and June Cleaver type of arrangement, right? But that's just, so we were born 50 years too late. But that's our deal, right? That's our deal. She stays home and I work. Part of my job is to make sure that she's taken care of. If you are not the breadwinner, or if your spouse makes significantly more than you, and I don't care husband or wife, or that doesn't matter, right? Even if you're not the breadwinner, if you don't contribute the lion's share, or even if you do, say it's 50-50. If one spouse dies, do you really want to drop your lifestyle by 50%, drop your standard of living, drop your Christmas presents, drop your vacations, drop everything? What you want to do to take care of your spouse is make sure that your spouse is okay if you die. Make sure your spouse is not just okay, but maintains their current lifestyle. And the way you do that is some simple math. If you have investments that throw off income every month, fantastic, you're set. If you have a 401k, you can't even touch that till you're 70. And that all has to be taxed at the highest tax rates. You need to make sure that your spouse is taken care of. And from my point of view, I'm the provider of financial means in my household. So it's my obligation to say, honey, if I die first, let me show you how you'll live. I've taken care of you. And if you're not the provider, if you're the other, in my wife's position, my wife should be asking, honey, Dustin, if you die first, how will I live? Show me how I'm going to be okay. Because I don't want to be destitute. I don't want to have to sell the house. I don't want to have to move to some horrible little town in the middle of the country that's cheap. I don't want to have to not be able to see my children and not go on vacation. I want to keep my lifestyle. So how will you provide that for me? What can we do today to plan for the future? And a lot of that is having a really good estate plan set up to know who's in charge. But let's go beyond that. Let's look at the assets and the income and where it comes from and make sure that you actually take care of your family. And if you'd like to talk about this, if you'd like more information about this, again, give me a call. Well, I'll sit down and talk with you for free. I won't charge you anything to have that initial conversation, to learn about your family and learn what solutions are there for your family. If you have a will and you didn't have any of these conversations, maybe you should have. But my number is 866-674-1130. Give me a call and let's talk about this. Give me a call. Let me make sure your estate is in order. Let's audit it. Let's go through the assets and audit it and make sure it's done right. You can reach me at 866-674-1130. That's 866-674-1130. My name is Dustin McFarland. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.